Hey, welcome back to another episode of the series that I'm doing here with Lars on Hellenistic astrology. And today we are going to be talking about the triplicity lots, which is one of the most basic and also one of the most significant and important tools in terms of interpreting charts. So if you have not seen the previous videos, I think you might have to check out because uh, especially the sect video and stuff. So there is a lot of things that is dependent on sect here. So I think it's important if you have not seen the sect video, you can just go ahead and have a look at it and then revisit this video. So welcome back, Lars, and
Thanks.
always fun.
Great.
Yeah. So I've been kind of seeing this, like looking into deep stuff of Hellenistic astrology has been like for the past 6 months or so. And when you kind of helped me understand what was the mistake that I was making with sect. So I was basically making all these mistakes related to triplicity lot as well. So
Okay.
so because everything is dependent on sect, and I probably had the wrong triplicity ruler at the wrong time. So I think that was the
Okay.
so that was the basic starting point where I kind of rechecked my stand in terms of sect and triplicity lords. So I think it'll be interesting to hear you talk something about it.
Sure. Okay, great. Yeah, first I'm going to share my screen so people can have a better idea of triplicity lords and what they are and so on. It's really simple. You can find this diagram like just by searching in Google triplicity lords and going to images, and you'll find it on a bunch of different websites too. But what we have is the triplicities, as people will know, are the elements, right? Fire, earth, air, and water. And then basically each of them has a set of 3 lords. So for all the fire signs in a day chart, a chart where the sun is above the horizon, the person was born during the day, the triplicity lords in this order are Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. And same for the rest of the signs, okay? Right, for earth signs, we have this order: Venus, Moon, Mars. And what we'll notice is that if we look at fire and air signs, we have Jupiter and Saturn are in each of them, and those are both day planets. So the fire and air signs are considered diurnal or masculine or positive signs. Positive polarity is what I mean.
Yeah.
And so we have the day planets ruling them, with the exception that Mercury trades places with the sun for the airy triplicity, probably just because Mercury needed to be in there somewhere. And, on some level, the sun doesn't really make sense for the airy triplicity, I don't think. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But then for the nocturnal signs, the earth and water signs, which are nocturnal, feminine, or negative, again, polarity-wise, not in terms of being bad, you have the night planets, right? Venus, Moon, Mars, and again, Venus, Moon, Mars. So that's the planets that are powerful during a chart of a person born at night, where the sun, meaning the sun is below the horizon, right? The ascendant, descendant axis, as we've talked about already in our video on sect, which we did post, right? We did that.
Yeah.
That video's out. Okay, cool. So you're probably, if you've never encountered this, you're probably wondering what the hell is the deal with this? I can understand the sect idea. I can understand a little bit about that, but why are they the way they are? And I would encourage you to read this article by Chris Brennan, which is free on his site, theastrologydictionary.com, under triplicity, just down here. So there's like a little blurb about it. It's a really great site for those who don't know it. It's really excellent stuff. And, Chris is just an excellent researcher, and he does a good job of presenting this stuff in a very pure form. I'm going to present it in a more practical form, or a practical form as I use it. So I don't want people to get confused. And that's why it's good to look at Chris's stuff too. But this article it's rather long, but it explains how something called the planetary joys, which we've touched upon a little bit, may be responsible for the triplicity idea. Basically, I'm going to go down to, I'm just going to, real quick explain. So Chris has, through his research, basically correlated air with the beginning. Okay, this is like sunrise, and then fire when the sun's highest in the sky, and the heat is most intense, right? And our digestion is at its peak, especially in like Ayurveda. The Agni, the digestive fire in the belly, is at its peak during this time, so it makes sense. So air, fire, and then water, sunset, and then earth is the most inert, so to speak, in this arrangement. And as you can see via the joys, right, we have the airy triplicity, right? Mercury, Saturn, Jupiter. Then we have the fiery triplicity, Saturn, Jupiter, Sun. Then the watery triplicity, composed of Mars, Venus, and Moon. And then the earthy triplicity, composed again of Mars, Venus, and Moon, but in a different order. Okay, in a slightly different order. And I think that this is a really good rationale. I think it's the best explanation out there so far for why the triplicities might be the way they are. So I really encourage having a look at this article, and it'll also teach you a lot about the joys and, especially from a historical perspective and that sort of thing. So, kudos to Chris for doing such great work there. And okay, back to this, we'll notice at night, the first triplicity lord becomes the one that was second in the day chart, right? So Jupiter switches places with the sun, Moon switches places with Venus, and so on. And this is pretty important, okay? And it's just those first two that switch. The third lord is considered the participating lord. It's considered sort of the least important, in a sense, the least important of the triplicity lords, but actually some people might argue it's the most important of the triplicity lords. It just depends on how you look at it. And then here on Project Hindsight, you can find this table of essential dignities, which we used before. And it shows the triplicity lords for each signs. But again, if you just memorize them, it's really easy to memorize them. You'll never need to refer to this table ever again in your life. Okay, cool. So I guess I'm gonna stop the share. If do you think I should stop it now? I just want to talk about triplicity.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. So, back to our wonderful, exuberantly handsome faces. How the hell do we use triplicity? Well, the most basic way they were used in the Hellenistic tradition was to find the sect light, which is the sun in a day chart, the moon in a night chart, right? And then look at its triplicity lords and analyze them in terms of regular techniques of astrology. What house are they in? What's their dignity? Are they afflicted by difficult aspects of malefics? Are they helped by benefics? And is their lord helping them or hurting them? And just assessing the triplicity lords as we normally would. And then basically Hellenistic authors, especially like Dorotheus in his text, that's the one I can remember the most, at least. It might be in other texts too, but he basically says to take the first triplicity lord of the sect light as ruling the first half of a person's life, and the second triplicity lord of that sect light as the second half of the life, and that the participating lord is supposed to basically make up the difference. Like if basically it's the idea if one of those first triplicity lords is not in great shape, but the third triplicity lord is in good shape, it kind of makes up the difference. So basically you want to see if 2 out of 3 of the triplicity lords are in good condition. And if they're all in good condition, then that's pretty stellar, and that can actually help. So that will support the person's entire nativity, and it will also support it can support their success and their fame, or it can hinder it. If a person has the 2 out of 3 triplicity lords, especially the first 2, like in an angle, for example, it can alleviate certain difficult conditions. For example, in Johnny Carson's chart, Johnny Carson hosted I think like the Tonight Show or the Late Night Show, one of these shows where, you know, a talk show host would interview celebrities like David Letterman does and Colbert does and so on. So Johnny Carson had the sun in Libra in the 12th house in a day chart, and he had the moon was also like cadent or something like that. And, you know, you look at his chart and you're like, wow, why was this guy so famous and influential? And there's a few different reasons, but one thing that really helps is that Saturn and Mercury, which are the two major triplicity lords of his sun in Libra, are in the first house. Okay, and the first house is one of the strongest houses and the most powerful, one of the most powerful for any kind of success in the world or fame or things like that. So basically you can see that his sun's kind of negative condition is being mitigated by those triplicity lords, and the sun itself is actually not that far from the ascendant, even though it's not in the ascendant, so that helps too. But I think the triplicity lords makes a tremendous difference. Now, in later Persian medieval texts, the authors started using this technique a little differently. Instead of looking at two halves of life, which are kind of difficult to determine anyway, there are some speculations on how to do that, but I'm not really convinced by it myself, and so I don't want to get into that here because it is complex. But basically, in the medieval tradition, they started taking the three lords as thirds of life, and there are varying opinions on how to do this. The way I like to do this is I like to just pretend that everyone's going to live to be at least 90. Now, I know that's not true. Okay, I'm aware that that's not true, but it makes this technique a lot more simple and fluid. And then I like to look at basically the roughly 30 years of each Saturn cycle as being one triplicity lord. And this seems to work well in practice in the few charts I've sort of practiced it on and whatnot. And I like the rationale. So instead of just using the first two to show successive halves of life, use all three, and all three of them show the different thirds of life. And this just seems to work really well. Like, and the best way to do it is it's a very general Time Lord or Dasha system. Okay, so what you can say is that sorry, somebody's car alarm was going off or something, but a person will be heavily engaged on a broad level, at least on a broad level, in the things signified by the placement of the triplicity lords. So, for example, like my own father, when he was in the second triplicity lord phase in a night chart, okay, that triplicity lord is placed in the fifth house, and that's when he had kids. That's when he had me and my brother. And so for a good chunk of that triplicity lord period, he was really focused on, you know, his kids and being a father and that sort of a thing, you know. And it literally is as simple as that. It literally can be and often is as simple as that. And so on a predictive level, triplicity lords is a powerful general technique. And then if you have different things coming together along with that general level, right, in other dashas and time lords and stuff, you can, you know, predict more accurately. And as far as using this psychologically or for more humanistic and spiritual kind of analysis of the chart, admittedly, I haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. I'm sort of working on a way that this technique might be more relevant for things other than just sheer prediction. Because, you know, if you see an afflicted triplicity lord, and it's in like the last third of the person's life, you know, it's like, it's not, you don't want to, you know, it's not something you want to like tell the person, oh, you're just going to have a really hard time in the last third. But you can kind of think of the triplicity lords as sort of becoming, they're almost like, you know, compared to the dispositor of the sect light, they're almost like they almost compete with the dispositor of the sect flight. It's really interesting, you know, because they have more of a say in the time period, if that makes sense, right? Than the dispositor might have. So while the dispositor is sort of what's behind a planet or a sect light, right? In this case, it's kind of like the soul behind the thing. The triplicity lords are sort of like maybe how the soul, or what's behind, I don't literally mean the soul, but I mean like what's behind the sect light, which is kind of our sort of our guiding light in life, so to speak. It might say something about how we are consciously sort of being attuned to things during that period of life, if that makes any sort of sense. You know, it's like a deep influence that can like shift our trajectory. Sometimes Hellenistic astrologers and especially modern revivalists like Robert Schmidt like to use this nautical analogy of like being on a ship. And so it's almost like the triplicity lord, if like the sun or the moon is like maybe the sail or the wind or the course that the ship is on or something, maybe the course the ship is on, the you know, or the guiding star, like the North Star or something, you know, in the sky, the pole star that sailors would use to navigate toward true north. You know, maybe the triplicity lords can be like the winds that come along and sort of steer us in different directions. So the triplicity lords, I think, have a powerful capacity to like alter our focus and our trajectory for better or worse. And so I don't think what they represent is necessarily like set in stone, but it's something that, you know, people will have to deal with. It's the idea that like, okay, during this period of life, you know, for better or worse, you're going to come under the sway of the winds of this triplicity lord, you know, and this is kind of the direction it's going to take you. Now, whether you are able to alter your course or not is going to be, you know, at least partly up to you, at least partly, right? There's going to be, we can't control what happens in our lives, but we can often control how we react to it or what we do with it. You know, when life gives you lemons, you can squeeze them in the eyes of your enemy. You can make lemonade, or you can make guacamole, but you need a few more ingredients to make guacamole, so it's maybe not as practical. Did you want to say anything about this?
No, I think there is also like two understandings of how triplicity lords have been given for Earth. Like we have day, night, and then participating. But I think there is also another tradition that talks only about two triplicity lords.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot to mention that. For those interested in that, you should search Claudius Ptolemy's Triplicity Lords and read about those, because it's pretty much the same, except that for water, Mars rules both. Day and night, and that's really the only difference. Otherwise, the first two are the same. They still reverse by night. I don't really know where that tradition comes from. We usually refer to it as Ptolemy's Triplicities, because I think he was kind of the person where most people discovered it first. But it might be older than that. I'm not sure. It also works very well, but the downside is you can't divide the life into these three periods, and you know, you don't have the participating lord to make up the difference, so to speak, if one triplicity lord is having a hard time.
Yeah. Anthony Lewis had written an article for this, like the Jan-Feb 2019 issue of the Celestial magazine, and he had kind of he kind of wrote about Ptolemy, Lilly, Dorothes, and Morinus.
Oh, great.
So I think that we might just go ahead and talk about that article on a later episode or something like that. Like we can explore the article. But I think that is a very good basic article, and it's probably very informative as well.
Great. Yeah, I'd like to read it here in a bit when, you know.
Yeah, sure.
When I get a chance.
And we are recording this on 15th Jan 2019. And it is just today morning Indian time. We just published the 6th issue of the magazine. And
Great.
yeah, I'm just giving this as an information because people should not have confusion, because I think this will be posted on a later date. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Great. Yeah, so that's a good, that will be a good article to read. And I won't talk about Marinus much, but Marinus is excellent to read, but he's also a reformer in a way. He made up his own system of triplicity, which I've never really bothered to experiment with, because I just really like the traditional system so much myself. So, so yeah, these are the general ways in which it was used and can be used. Other things you can do with it is you can look at the triplicity lords for any planet, house, or lot. And I think it's very useful, especially to look at it for lots, because lots signify very specific subjects, right? So you can look at the triplicity lords for like the lot of marriage to see, you know, maybe when marriage will be most supported during the person's life, or when it might come under some challenges and so on. There's also a technique in which you would look at the triplicity lords for Venus, and if most of them were in good condition, even if Venus was afflicted, you might still have gains from marriage. So like the idea was like, you know, if Venus is in good condition, the marriage will be good. But if the triplicity lords aren't in good condition of Venus, that is Venus's sign, then the marriage won't be have much utility beyond maybe just being, you know, generally kind of a nice relationship, but there won't be much wealth, there won't be much success. And this is stuff that is still important today, but it was maybe more important to people in the Middle Ages and further on. But if Venus was in bad condition, the marriage could be really kind of just not that great on its own, but it yields like a certain amount of wealth and success and power and mobility in society and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You can also definitely look at the triplicity lords of the ascendant and the midheaven. Those are very useful for determining kind of, you know, similar things to the sect light, but whereas the sect light is going to be more impersonal, right? The ascendant and midheaven will be a bit more personal. You can do it for the lot of fortune as well. So, you know, the difference might be the sect light is like, you know, the course of your ship, but the ascendant is more like your ability to steer that ship, let's say, or the ascendant is like kind of your thoughts and skills and kind of how you're sort of going through life and what's really influencing you there. So that's a good way to use them. I think I really like them in general. They're just a really great broad time lord. And later on in the medieval astrology, they started to use dignity or triplicities as a form of dignity. I sort of got away from this for a while because I found it questionable, but I started reconsidering it, and I realized that since the triplicity lords do have such a strong influence on things from this sort of hidden area, that I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know that I would necessarily consider, okay, the way they do it is they say that like in a day chart, right, the sun will have triplicity in all the fire signs, but in a night chart, Jupiter will have triplicity in all the fire signs. So he'll have dignity if he's in a fire sign that's not his own in a night chart. I still don't really like this idea. I still don't really think it makes much sense. But what I do think does work is to give some amount of weight to the triplicity lord's ability to like govern a sign. You know, so if the other lords are afflicted, the triplicity lord might have more say, and actually any one of them, all three of them. But I don't think it's a dignity the way bounds and signs and exaltation and face and so on are really a dignity. That's just kind of my opinion at the moment. But
I was kind of getting to that because so when you can kind of qualitatively measure how a particular period of life or how a particular topic of life is going to be based upon the dignity of triplicity lords, I was kind of going to ask you if we can use it as a separate dignity, like how we kind of dignify and interpret a planet placed in a particular bound. So,
so how can we wait? So I'm sorry. Could you just repeat that? It's
No, no.
kind of
I was just saying, like, we kind of, let's say, a lot of fortune is placed in Venus's bounds. Okay,
okay.
so that is basically understood as a planet in good dignity, even though if it is not placed in a good dignity based upon the sign in which it is placed. But from bounds point of view, it will have a reasonable dignity. So, do you think you can consider the same thing when it comes to triplicity lord? If the triplicity lord of the lot of fortune is kind of well placed, or or if it is badly placed, do you think there is going to be a lot of influence in terms of how the lot of fortune is going to work?
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I think during that period of time, there will be a lot of influence during that, however people want to do it. If they do it as successive halves, if they do it during that 30 years, like I do, I think that's when it will affect it. So the thing is, though, you have to look at the whole testimony. Like if the lot of fortune overall is in really good condition and its lord is in good condition and so on, right? Then a badly placed triplicity lord isn't going to harm it that much, but it
Exactly.
might make things a little harder during that 30 years for a lot of fortune things.
Good.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So
Cool.
that kind of establishes how we need to use triplicity lords. So I think triplicity lords is just like how you use dasha system in terms of it kind of plays a major role when the period of the triplicity lord arrives in life. So that is the basic point of judgment how we should interpret the chart.
Yeah, yeah. And like you and I are both like transitioning into our like second triplicity lord period, for example,
Yeah.
so we can both like look and see how those planets are and how our lives might be radically different, because life does become radically different, and it seems to do so in in phases, like long or short, and that's all based on time lords, I think. So the triplicity lords sort of give us something general. And if you're running a triplicity lord period of, like, let's just pretend again 30 years, but let's say it's like Jupiter. Well, if you're I see no reason why you can't use triplicity lords with like Vimshotri Dasha, for example.
Yes. Yeah,
Why
I was
not,
kind of
right?
thinking on the same lines.
Yeah.
So
Why
if
not? Okay, so if you're running Jupiter triplicity and then you go into Jupiter Mahadasha or Bhukti, right? Then that's probably going to be a lot more significant. That's going to activate that more powerfully, and so on. And the same thing for if you were running, a period of time ruled by Jupiter via like the Hellenistic technique of zodiacal releasing. Like if you're in a ZR period where the sign of Jupiter becomes activated, or a sign ruled by Jupiter, right? Then, and you're also in that Jupiter triplicity period, right? That's going to be more powerful. So it's always about like seeing how the time lords if they're all showing the same thing, then we get like a more definite event or a more definite trajectory. But if they're all showing different things, those are the years where maybe a lot of little things happen that are quasi-related, but nothing's really coming together for everything, for this like event to definitely happen or whatever. I don't know why I'm doing this, but
no, it's kind of an assertion.
yeah, it's like, this is coming, it's coming down the pipe, whatever. But I wanted to just briefly mention like a final way to use triplicity lords, which I would really like to do more myself, but I just haven't bothered. I've been lazy and I haven't memorized it, so my use of it has been limited. But basically, in the Middle Ages, I guess early Middle Ages, there was an astrologer who has a really strange name. It's like Al and Dazagar or something like that. I wish I could remember it so I could type it in, but I can't remember it right now. So a really weird name, Persian, and well, sorry, I shouldn't say weird. I just mean it's not something I can easily pronounce and remember. So anyway, he seems to have developed a system of using triplicity lords of the different houses, all three of them, to each signify a very specific subject of that house. And this is really cool stuff, because what it means is that, and you can just read a whole chart like this. It's amazing. It's like if we take the 7th house, right? One, like the first triplicity lord will represent like marriage or the marriage partner. And then the second triplicity lord will represent like opponents. And then the third triplicity lord will represent, I forget, something else. And the point is that what you could do is you can read the chart for topics using this triplicity lord technique, and then compare the testimony to the basic lord. So let me use the example with the 11th house. I don't remember exactly what he says about it, but let's just pretend for a moment that the first triplicity lord signifies friends, the second signifies hopes, and the third signifies gains. Okay, these are three fairly distinct things that all fall under the 11th house. And let's just say the lord of the 11th house is, let's say it's Venus, and the 11th house is Libra. Okay, so then what we have is we have Venus as the major lord, signifying all those things broadly. But then when we compare Venus to Saturn, and let's just say it's a day chart, compare Venus to Saturn, the first triplicity lord, we can combine those to see the types of friends the person has. We can combine Venus with Mercury, the second triplicity lord, to see what kinds of hopes the person has. And we could combine Venus with the testimony of Jupiter, the third triplicity lord, for an air sign, to see what kinds of gains the person might have, right? Like gains of all kinds, but maybe like wealth or profit from actions, right? Because the 10th house is actions. So this is a really cool, really powerful technique, and it can allow us to kind of focalize things without the use of lots, or without the immediate use of lots, right? It's sort of a way to just have a more quick look at dividing up these topics and themes. And so, it's a cool way to do, I think it's a cool way to do charts and use triplicity lords. And I think that pretty much sums up the major uses of triplicity lords as I understand them and use them. So.
Okay. Yes, triplicity lords, I think it is very fascinating when we first started, because it can act as a specific time lord in itself. And it kind of gives some of the major themes of how the life is kind of going to take off during that particular period. So when we were just having a very casual talk on that day about the second triplicity lords of our lives that we were talking about. So I think that kind of got me even more into this triplicity lord stuff, and it's very cool to have a bird's eye view of how things are going to happen. So
yeah, because we do shift and change with those Saturn cycles, I think, in big ways. I don't think it's I don't know anybody else who has put forth that idea of the Saturn cycles and the triplicity lords. I came up with that on my own. It may be other people have probably come up with it too, but I came to that just through sheer reason, and it just makes sense, right? When we have these Saturn returns, it is a shift. It may not be super major, right? But it's a shift. It's a definite. I think most people notice something definitely shifts, and you start to feel like you're more of maybe you're more of an adult or something. I know it depends on the person and stuff, but Dane Rudyard always talked about that man's life can be archetypally divided into 3 28 periods, and that the first 28 period, 28-year period is basically, it falls right in between the progressed lunar return, meaning your moon by secondary progressions returns to its natal place, so at about 27 and a half, and then at 29 and
Saturn.
0.4 years, the Saturn returns. So 28 is kind of this archetypal mathematically pure version of those two cycles. And if you add 3 of those together, you get 84 years, which is roughly a Uranus cycle. So Uranus is kind of like ruling over this in a way in terms of the modern associations. But what's also fascinating is that he likens the 3 28-year periods to basically the first quarter of the zodiac, the second quarter of the zodiac, and the first third of the zodiac, second third, and final third. So Aries through Cancer is the first third, which also in Indian astrology, right, would be the first series of nakshatras, the first 9 nakshatras, right? So we have this emphasis on 3 in all these traditions. And so the first period of 28 years is archetypally where we just sort of, the focus is more in life on not who we are as an individual, but who we are as a sort of like an ego that has inherited certain tendencies from our community, our family, our friendships, our experiences for this first 28 years are mostly within that womb of society. So we're very much, we are individualized, but we are still archetypally married to our culture. The second 28-year period, which begins with Leo, is where we start to become self-conscious and say, what am I really here to do? What does it mean for me to be an individual with my own unique thoughts and ideas, where I'm not just following what other people have fed me or what I was raised with and stuff. And that's archetypally where we question our values, And of course it can happen at different times in life. This is just like a standard idea, and it's a nice way to look at it. And it's good for counseling your clients as well. But, like I started questioning things really seriously at like 20. But that's not to say that I may not have some other breakthrough, right? After I go through my whole Saturn return, I might realize, oh crap, there's all these other things I wasn't questioning. But anyway, then in the final 28-year period, which begins with Sagittarius, is basically the period of synthesis. So we have thesis, antithesis, right? Antithesis, and synthesis. So the final period is where we sort of bridge the gap between youth and adult in old age. And metaphorically, we're supposed to become wise, and we're supposed to become less egocentric, and we're supposed to sort of let go of everything that has sort of like defined us in a sense, and just become wise. And that's in ancient Indian culture, I guess Vedic India, there were 4 stages of life, which is interesting. But the final stage is similar to what I'm talking about, where the Brahmin man would retire from life and become a forest dwelling philosopher who would prepare himself for death and basically become like an ascetic yogi, but an ascetic yogi who would still be near his community to counsel people spiritually who could come and seek him, right? So this is kind of that last phase, which we don't really have in our culture, our Western culture anymore. Because I'm here in the West. I don't know what it's like in India, but like in the West, like you have all kinds of, especially men, but women too, like wanting to be youthful again, wanting to try to get back to that Aries phase, that adolescent phase, instead of becoming wise and preparing for death. And Sagittarius through Pisces, those are all really impersonal signs. They're deeply impersonal, right? Because not only are they the last phase, not only do they refer to like the winter months where, you start to lose everything, at least in the tropical zodiac, but they're also ruled by Jupiter and Saturn, right? The furthest planets that we can see visibly all year round, and the 2 planets that move the slowest. So they're the least personal. They're the most impersonal of the 7. And that's the final phase where we enter that more impersonal or possibly transpersonal dimension of life, at least archetypally and naturally. So I think that Ridyar's commentary can be married to this ancient technique of triplicity lords and Saturn cycles and so on. And I think that will do it for what I have to say, I guess.
That was really well done, actually. So
Thanks.
even I had this idea of the secondary progressed moon, the natal moon returning, the progressed moon returning to its actual natal position. So when
Cool.
you were talking about the Saturn return and the triplicity lot, this was running in my mind, and
Great.
it was very quite funny that you had to mention that Dane Rudhyar stuff. So it was very good. So, and I think that pretty much brings us to the end of this session. And as we mentioned, I think in the next session we'll probably come up with one or two example charts to kind of explain some of the most important things that we have discussed in terms of essential dignities. So,
Okay.
yeah. And thanks so
Cool.
much, Lash.
All right. Thanks, Aswin.